We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
For almost 80 years, UFOs and conspiracy theories have been inexorably linked. In the 1950s and 60s, under the direction of Edward J. Ruppelt and J. Allen Hynek, Project Blue Book sought to study the phenomena in hopes to identify the previously unidentified flying objects. That effort culminated in the Condon Committee, which heard from Hynek as well as various ufologists from the civilian-run research group APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. The Condon Committee concluded that UFOs didn't pose a threat to national security, and Project Blue Book was shuttered in 1969. But the end of the project posed more questions than answers, because the American public still didn't know what they were seeing in the skies. UFOs, extraterrestrials, and flying saucers soared in popularity. Grassroots groups like the Mutual UFO Network sprung up all over the country. It was the height of the Cold War, and more American civilians were studying the skies than ever before. Hoping to outpace the Soviets, private military contractors and the U.S. Air Force continued to develop high-tech aircraft and weapon systems, like the stealth bomber and ballistic missiles. But with so many Americans looking for UFOs after Project Blue Book, the government had to find a way to keep a lid on these secret projects. Because the last thing the Air Force wanted was for their new tech to fall into Russian hands because, somebody in the middle of nowhere saw a stealth plane and told his MUFON contacts about it. Worse still, U.S. agents had no way of knowing which UFO groups might have been infiltrated by Soviet spies looking for information on new aircrafts. The solution to this problem was to leverage America's obsession with UFOs. Using the established communication channels of the existing UFO community, the Air Force Office of Special Operations began to observe the observers, and, when necessary, throw them off the trail of military development by injecting targeted misinformation. Soon, UFO networks connected with government leakers, and those insiders claimed to be telling the truth about the flying saucer phenomena, but they were instead passing carefully crafted pieces of disinformation intended to redirect the UFO community away from military operations and instead to theories that were truly out of this world. The most infamous of these were Paul Bennewitz and Bill Moore, two UFO investigators who became tangled in the web of Richard Doty, agent for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. For nearly a decade, Doty fed Moore and Bennewitz a litany of disinformation disguised as governmental secrets. These stories of gray aliens performing bizarre experiments in an underground base in New Mexico would become the foundation of the modern UFO mythos. The new documentary, Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, dives into this most peculiar moment in history. Based on the book by Adam Gorightly, the film is a fascinating, insightful look at the true story behind some of the most legendary claims in ufology. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, but sometimes the fiction isn't all that it seems either. Adam isn't a stranger to strange truths either. He's been writing on subjects like UFOs, conspiracy theories, and cults for decades. A self-proclaimed Renaissance man of the lunatic fringe, he's the perfect person to get to the bottom of the weirdest times in history. Adam Gorightly, thank you so much for coming on Slaying Monsters and talking to us today. I got a chance to check out your film, Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, the documentary that you made, and I just thought it was a wonderful piece on the history of UFOs, flying saucers. So I thought we had to have you on to talk about it. So thank you.
Great. Glad you liked it.
Yeah. So to start off with, give our listeners a little bit of background on who are you and what do you do and how did you end up in the world of UFOs?
As far as ending up in the world of UFOs, it goes back to my youth, my teens, perhaps, in the 70s, and my first exposure was by a friend named Ricky Doyle, who they had all these paperbacks back in the day, the ones that fit in your back pocket. And there was a series of UFO ones, and Ricky was into those, and he shared some with me, and I thought, this is interesting. A lot of them were these kind of cheesy things. You also had the ancient astronauts books, and so that was early exposure. There was In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. I'm sure that was an influence that got me interested in these. Even before the Roswell resurgence in the late 70s, there were these stories about crashed saucers and aliens and perhaps alien in captivity. All that was fascinating. I also remember, we're like in the late 70s now, going into the local supermarket and seeing these tabloid magazines about Adolf Hitler and his secret fleet of flying saucers. So all that craziness was swirling around. There was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which really blew my mind. And I had a psychedelic acid trip around that period where a friend and I saw a bunch of UFOs. So
oh wow.
I've told that story many times, and I'm willing to tell it, if you want to hear it.
I would love to hear it. That sounds incredible.
Okay, here we go again. It was 1978. A friend and I were at a party. This friend of mine, we had still have a simpatico of sort. We wrote music together and kind of had, almost sometimes telepathic stuff where you're reading one another's mind, similar to relationship maybe with a wife or somebody you're close to, a brother. Sure. So we had that going on. So we're at this party, took this acid. Guy who handed it out to us said, "Be careful, this is double dipped." Whatever that entailed. Well, it was some pretty heavy stuff, and the walls were kind of closing. It was just too much going on at this party, so we said, let's get out of here, man. Go for a walk. So, and this was in Fresno, California, kind of suburban area, and we're walking along. So we need to get away a little bit. Let's go walk on the ditch bank, the levee. That'll get us away from people and houses a little bit. And so before we even got to the levee, I joked, what if we saw a UFO right now? Nobody'd believe us. We started laughing uncontrollably about that prospect. Then got up on the ditch bank. It wasn't like 15 minutes later we saw our first UFO.
Wow.
We saw like 7 or 8. The whole range, flying saucer types, cigar-shaped. The craziest was this thing that had a multicolored propeller.
Oh, wow. Wow. Like an airship.
It was funky, similar to that kind of thing. When we saw the first UFO, I was so startled by it or taken aback, I fell to one knee. My buddy helped me up, and so we started describing what we were seeing, and we were seeing the same thing, but were we transmitting those thoughts to ourselves? Was this a dual hallucination?
Right.
So we continue on, kind of at the point where we turned around, probably a couple miles or so. I saw the last UFO was like a comet that was coming down, then it turned into a spaceship, and that's the last one we saw. So we turned around and walked back. I think we were just to the point where we saw the UFO, where I fell to one knee, saw a beam from the sky come down, and like down at the point where we saw that first UFO, and that was basically the end of that adventure.
Wow.
Afterwards, I was convinced, yeah, man, we saw real alien spaceships, and my buddy, he wasn't as he wasn't sure what the hell we had seen. And as time progressed, I wasn't either, and I started entertaining a bunch of different theories about what I had seen. It was that was probably based on different books and things I was reading. I came across one of those books about how UFOs are biblical demons, that Christian groups put out. So that kind of blew my mind for a while.
Yeah.
And then I got, looking into mind control and all of this stuff, my labs, those type of theories. And then one that appealed to me and made a lot of sense was the John Keel super spectrum theory,
Right.
If you're familiar with that whole thing. I don't need to get into it, but basically we were, through our altered states, we were able to tune into a certain frequency and see, maybe things that are always there, but you have to be in that certain state of mind to be able to witness that, kind of like psychics tuning into a certain frequency.
Right.
Nowadays, I think it was just something going on in the chemistry of our minds. But that there's perhaps some telepathic factor there that's working.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting that you two were sort of feeding off each other's perceptions of it, and maybe even influencing each other without being conscious that you were doing so.
I used to play around with a similar theory, and I gave a couple lectures on this over the years, where the early UFO contactees ritual magicians. What I was putting forward had to do with my own experience, sort of, that, before we saw the UFOs, I brought that up. What if we saw some UFOs right now? No one would believe us. And it was like, perhaps I planted that seed, and it was like an unwitting magic ritual,
Yeah, like you primed you primed your brains in a way to be ready to perceive it, whatever it was, whether it was real or not. It was like a subtle suggestion of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was writing for zines starting in the late 80s, 90s. That's where a lot of the action was, with people putting out zines about different conspiracy theories, paranormal, Forteana type stuff. And so I was kind of starting to look at UFOs again during that period. In the mid-2000s, started going to a few UFO conferences. And then, I actually presented some lectures at a couple, like at Roswell convention, and when was that? 2007, which was like the 60th anniversary.
Yeah, it would be. And so then your documentary, Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, was based on your book, which I take it is the publication of all this research that you were doing around that time.
Well, sort of. I wasn't doing any deep research. Well, yeah, kind of started to, but for many years it was this, like, I was aware of a lot of these stories, like the MJ-12 papers, Dulce Base, and all of this. I really didn't look into them in depth until 2017, 2018, and that had to do with meeting Tal Levesque.
Right.
Which is featured in a chapter in the book called My Breakfast with Tal, this colorful character, kind of mysterious figure who was involved in the release of the Dulce papers in the late 80s. At that point, I was basically going to write a 10,000 word article called My Breakfast with Tal. I started looking into the Dulce story to find out how much of this was fact, fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And, I realized getting into that the Dulce story was connected to a bunch of other stories going back to the Bennewitz affair.
Right.
And the MJ-12 papers and all of that. So that basically became what the book's about, how all these stories were seemingly connected as part of disinformation or misinformation in some cases. These were like the prominent stories in the late 70s through the mid-90s.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into some of these that you connect. And it's so hard because there are so many threads here individually. And some of them connect and some of them don't, and some of them are dead ends. And then and I feel like sometimes that's intentional to obfuscate what's actually going on. Let's start with Paul Bennewitz, I guess, because it seems like that's the thread that we keep coming back to whenever we talk about this 1980s disinformation campaign. And it seems like the story of Paul Bennewitz actually starts with Gabe Valdez and cattle mutilations. Is that right?
Yeah, you could place it there. Bennewitz, he was a physicist, scientist. He had a business, family business, Thunder Scientific, that was located right outside the gate of Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he developed different instruments for aircraft, sensors, altimeters, that type of stuff. I think he even provided parts for the space shuttle back then. But
wow.
I could date back to the mid-70s at least. He was interested in UFOs and cattle mutilations. He was a card-carrying member of APRO, that was Aerial Phenomena Research Organization out of Tucson. They're basically a UFO research group. He met Gabe Valdez. I'm trying to remember, I think it was the spring of 79. There was this famous cattle mutilation conference in Albuquerque. Mm-hmm. And I know they both attended that, as did Tal Levesque.
Mm.
And so Bennewitz started going out to Dulce. That's where Gabe Valdez was, the Dulce area. He was a highway patrolman there. And you see him in the film documentary.
Oh,
Strange Harvest.
Strange Harvest, right. That was
right.
That was Linda Howell's documentary.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can see Gabe back in the day. And so Valdez was basically investigating a lot of cattle mutilations that were happening around Dulce that seemed to be, in some instances, associated with UFO sightings, which were also going on. In some cases, the black helicopters, so
right.
There's a lot going on there. And Bennewitz would go out there with him as a ride-along at night. Valdez had the late shift, and he was looking into cattle mutilations and UFOs with Gabe Valdez during that period. In December of 79, he saw some strange craft over Kirtland Air Force Base.
Right.
In the area of Monsanto Mountain, which was a pretty large underground facility where a lot of stuff was going on. There was, at one time, the largest stockpile of nuclear armaments, according to some accounts. Large underground facility there, and he saw these basically flying saucers. He described them as saucers land in that area, then take off, and he was disturbed by that. He contacted Air Force Security shortly after, so that was his first contact with the officials at Kirtland Air Force Base. A lot was going on at Kirtland during that period with stealth technology being developed. There's Sandia Labs there where they were doing all kinds of secret work with developing spy satellites in the early days of non-lethal weapons. So a lot was going on there, and Bennewitz considered it a national security threat.
Understandably so.
I mentioned his business was located at the gate of Kirtland, and it's still in existence, still a family-run business. And another part of Kirtland, he had his townhouse, which was like 200 yards from the fence at Kirtland. He could look, from the roof of his townhouse, he could look right into that Monsanto mountain area. And so he kept a watchful eye on it, was filming and photographing these things. In the meantime, we're like in May of 1980, a woman named Myrna Hansen had a UFO encounter in Eagle Nest, New Mexico. She and her son, they witnessed a UFO in the sky that beamed down a light and sucked up a cow into the ship, and then they got sucked up into the ship. And as she claims, she saw the cow dissected or mutilated on the ship, like they were doing some type of medical experiments, and they did some type of experiments or medical procedures on she and her son Sean, who was like 7 or 8. And then afterwards, she was hysterical, went to the Highway Patrol office in Cimarron, was hysterical, and was telling them, the officers there, what happened. They didn't know what to do with this lady, but they knew Gabe Valdez was the go-to guy for UFOs and cattle mutes, so they contacted him. According to the story, Gabe came and picked her up and took her all the way to Bennewitz's place in Albuquerque. Bennewitz had contacts with APRO, and the guy who was doing a lot of the abduction regressions, Leo Sprinkle, came in to put Myrna Hansen under hypnotic regressions to find out more about her experience, ostensibly, I guess, to help her work through this, but it only got crazier from that point. Myrna Hansen and her son, and it's not really clear. There's tape recordings you'll hear in the film. It sounds like Myrna Hansen's mother was also there, and Bennewitz's wife got caught up in this, and they felt they were being beamed by the aliens. The impact of the beam was such that he said it knocked down his wife at one time.
Right.
And so he set it up so they kind of like a Faraday cage in a room where they could block out the alien beams, and Bennewitz was kind of a mad scientist guy, so he's creating different instruments to counteract what he felt were the alien beams going on.
Including something with lining his car with aluminum foil too, right?
Yeah.
That was part of his way he blocked them.
Yeah, that was like the initial regression he did in his Lincoln Town car. It covered the whole car with heavy aluminum foil, to block out the alien beams. Myrna Hansen, her story was that, she'd been at one point taken to an underground facility and was going under, through some type of medical procedure, and she broke loose and was running through it. And she started seeing all the human-alien hybrids and the burbling vats and that type of stuff. Bennewitz became convinced she had an implant at the base of her skull. All of these stories that, this seemed to be connected with the cattle mutilations. She had seen cattle mutilated on this ship. It really got quite crazy. Myrna Hansen was there for, as far as I can tell, for several weeks, underwent quite a few hypnotic regressions, and then around September is when Richard Doty first came on the scene, because Bennewitz was still in contact with the military. They weren't the security officials at Kirtland, they didn't seem to be doing much. He started sending out letters to different state representatives, even sent President Ronald Reagan a letter outlining his research in this paper he put together called Project Beta. And he was convinced now that it was aliens that he'd seen at Kirtland, and that he was picking up their signals and he trying to decode them, and eventually believed he was actually picking up the alien communications and having conversations with them.
Before we jump into the Richard Doty side of it, I want to just go back and talk a little bit more about Myrna Hansen, because she's one of the most fascinating people in the history of UFO study, I think, because she's here. She has this alleged abduction. She gets hypnosis from at least Leo Sprinkle, and then she sort of disappears, right? We don't know her whereabouts. We don't know her son's whereabouts. She's just a ghost in the wind.
Yeah. There was also another hypnotic regression guy, James Harder, who also did several sessions with Myrna Hansen, if that was her real name.
Right.
If you do a web search, you'll come up with a movie star from like the 40s and 50s, Myrna Hansen. Maybe, perhaps she was playing a role. When I interviewed Greg Valdez a few years back, that was Gabe Valdez's son, he was privy to a lot of this stuff. He'd go out on cattle mutilation investigations with his dad, and he went with his dad to Bennewitz's place several times, and it was his suspicion that Myrna Hansen was part of this disinformation operation. According to Bill Moore, who we can talk more about later, Myrna Hansen moved to California, but that was like, other researchers have looked into her, and it's kind of a cold trail. But one thing with a lot of the abductees who went under hypnotic regression from Leo Sprinkle and this James Harder guy, Dr. James Harder, they used pseudonyms for them. That's pretty well established. So she might have well had a pseudonym. There's some old transcripts I have of the Hansen regressions, and they also regress her son, and her son has a different last name than her, so they might have made the mistake of using her son's real name, but not hers.
Okay.
I guess, the son could have had a different last name, but she basically disappeared, except in 1989 or 90, person who claimed she also had experiences at Dulce Base as a alien abductee by the name of Krista Tilton, claimed that she had talked to Myrna Hansen during that period, which I'm dubious about. But another odd angle to this is that Bennewitz claimed that she had a implant at the base of her skull, and claimed he was working with the military on this, the Air Force, the Lovelace, I think, medical facilities that are connected to Kirtland Base. He said in these tapes we have, I don't think this part shows up in the film, but that he was working with them, and part of it was to take Myrna Hansen in and examine CAT scans or whatever of this implant. And so there's an odd story related to that Richard Doty told, where they brought Myrna Hansen in, and Air Force hypnotists worked with her, which is kind of odd. It's starting to sound like my labs, and they took her to an underground area. And as they were regressing her, came out she was describing an underground facility at Kirtland, that they had concerns because it was top secret. So perhaps part of the operation was to get her thinking this occurred at Dulce Base. And so something might have happened along these lines, but how much can you believe what comes from Richard Doty? So, it's kind of...
Right. Bennewitz is only one of the people who ended up with this sort of handshake deal with the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, I think, AFOSI, who they would sort of read these people in, right, and work with them, maybe hand them some information in exchange for the information that was coming from these sources back to the Air Force. And Richard Doty was obviously I don't know if ringleader is exactly the person, but he's the one that we know the most about, I suppose.
Yeah, he and Bill Moore was the conduit.
Right.
Here, and according to the story Moore told, he was approached by high-level military intelligence or high levels of the CIA. Stories, a couple versions of the story he told as far as who his contacts were, but that they approached him sometime in maybe mid-'80. This was after his book, The Roswell Incident, came out, and they said basically that he was one of the most knowledgeable people in the field, and they had a deal for him that if he would keep track of different people in the field of ufology at the time, let them know what they're up to, then in exchange they would give him top secret information on UFOs. And so that was kind of the deal that was made. And during that period, there was a lot of civilian contractors that were involved in UFO research, like, for instance, Bennewitz, but there was a number of others that worked on different government contracts. Lee Graham was one that he helped develop a part for the stealth bomber. But it was kind of a need-to-know thing. He was just developing this one part. He didn't really know everything about what he was working with, but Graham, at the same time as a civilian contractor, was investigating these reports of UFOs that eventually turned out to be sightings of the stealth bomber during that period. And so these were the type of people that Bill Moore was interacting with as part of the agreement with, this intelligence agent. He used the name of the Falcon.
Right.
But Doty was basically the proxy or middleman, and the deal was they were passing along these phony documents to these civilian contractors, things like the Aquarius papers and the MJ-12 documents, passing them to these different people in ufology to see where they'd end up, who they were interacting with. According to Doty, they were concerned with foreign nationals, spies, spies from the Soviet Union, Chinese spies. First of all, to see who they were interacting with during that period. And that's one thing Doty said in a recent interview with, I say recent, probably 10 or 15 years old, with George Knapp. The reason we approached Bill Moore was not, we didn't care about UFOs, but we were interested in his contacts with Russian nationals.
Because Bill Moore spoke Russian, right? He was fluent in Russian?
I think I've said that at times, but I don't know if he was actually fluent, but he had a degree in Russian. So he had those connections there, and he was interacting with people in the Soviet Union, UFO, quote-unquote, UFO researchers in the Soviet Union during that period. The suspicion with AFOSI and intelligence agencies were that, researchers in the Soviet Union were actually Russian spies, or KGB.
Right, which makes sense when you think about we were in the middle of the Cold War, and and a lot of these documents that they were sort of disseminating, also it seems like they might have put little, I use the word tracer as sort of a hyperbole, but they put little things that were so outlandish in them that they would know where they ended up because somebody would be talking about the outlandish thing. Like you mentioned in the doc the idea that the aliens like strawberry ice cream. Which is something that you would never, nobody is ever going to come up with that on their own. But I've seen that on forums around that people are like, oh yeah, it's strawberry ice cream.
The other part of it was in a lot of these hoax documents, and Doty denies having a hand in those, but it sure looks like he was involved. But a lot of them will have, like, there's the Aquarius Project, which was actually a secret government project, but it didn't have anything to do with UFOs per se, but somehow these code names were used within these documents. So once again, they might have been putting these out there to see how different spies and such would react when they're asked about the Aquarius Project. Or, in the same way, maybe some photos of experimental aircraft that are presented at UFO conferences, as extraterrestrial vehicles to get the reaction of some of these spies when they're shown these photos, if they're on to, what was being developed with different technology, weapon systems, whatever, in the U.S.
Right. And then also possibly where are your leaks as well?
Yeah.
Because I believe Bill Moore gave the Aquarius papers to Paul Bennewitz, and he just kept them and never released them.
Not exactly.
Not exactly?
It's a confusing story.
Okay.
Now, there's like three parts of this story. So the first one, my friend Greg Bishop, you familiar with his book Project Beta?
Yes. Yeah.
So the story he got from Bill Moore, the Aquarius document, that initially Doty gave him this teletype about an Aquarius project that looked to be an official government document. Then sometime afterwards, he got another version of this that had been altered that included informations about extraterrestrials and Majestic 12, I think, for the first time is mentioned in this document. Doty said, yeah, take that to Bennewitz so he'll get it and he'll start waving it in front of the press, and it would be a way that we could discredit Bennewitz. Because, Bennewitz was onto things, secret testing of aircrafts, and he's picking up these satellite communications, so they just wanted to confuse him, discredit him, right, etc. Moore said that, Moore told Bishop he was reluctant to pass along that document to Bennewitz at the time, so he kind of sat on it, and Doty kept pressuring him to the point where he said, okay, if you don't pass this along to him, we're going to cut you out of this relationship we had. And so Moore decided, okay, he'd pass it on to him, and with a disclaimer, be careful, let's research this and don't run with this, right away. We don't know if this is a legit document. And he said that at that point, Bennewitz locked it in his safe and never did anything with it. But I found that wasn't actually true.
Oh.
The Albuquerque airport is right next to Kirtland. And whenever this was, it was might have been 80, 81. They had a huge power outage there. The communication went down for over the course of the day, several hours. And it appears it was something that was going on at Kirtland, maybe testing of these satellites or who knows what, that disrupted Albuquerque airport. And so in this article, they talked to different people, and UFOs came into the story, and they actually talked to Bennewitz and a few other people in this newspaper article. And within it, Bennewitz mentioned the Aquarius Project.
So he did bring it up then.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But then part 3 of this story, there's Bennewitz was interviewed by this UFO researcher. He was with CUFO, Center for UFO Studies. That's the group that Vallée and Hynek were involved with.
Right.
He interviewed him, I guess, might have been around 84, but anyway, went through the whole Myrna Hansen episode and his sightings, and he had mentioned he had taken these photos at Kirtland Air Force Base, and he sent them to get developed, and then they disappeared, like somebody stole them, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
But what Bennewitz said that somebody came by his house one day, and in the interview with McCampbell, he doesn't say it was Bill Moore, but he says somebody came to his house one day with this Aquarius document, told him it was a top secret document and not to share it with anybody, and started going through it with him. And this one was several pages, and within it had all of his photos of UFOs he had taken that had disappeared.
Oh, wow. His own photos.
Yeah. Once again, they said, don't share this with anybody or you could get in trouble. You get prosecuted. And so I guess he locked it away in his safe. And interesting way to put a lid on keeping him from, releasing his photos.
While also reinforcing that whatever he is photographing is something that is of top secret government or extraterrestrial origin or whatever, making that seem more important. You bring up the Center for UFO Studies where J. Allen Hynek was with that story, and there's this whole other little side tangent that J. Allen Hynek might have given Bennewitz a computer that was then relaying information apparently directly from the aliens.
Yeah. That was Bill Moore's claim that he was having adult beverages with Hynek one evening, and that came up, and he said that he had delivered this computer from the Air Force to Paul Bennewitz. Hynek, for several years, he was Project Blue Book. He worked on contracts with the government. And so, there's definitely the possibility he was a scientific advisor that this happened, but that's the only source we really have for that claim is Bill Moore. Although Bennewitz did have a computer, which he did believe he was communicating with the aliens through. There's different witnesses, like Gabe Valdez went to his house and witnessed, and it would also send images. This must have been a very basic, what do you call, text ASCII type things.
Yeah.
And one of them, we show it in the movie, Gabe Valdez described it as looking like a dinosaur or a reptilian type thing.
Right.
And the communications were more like beeps and stuff that Bennewitz believed he had a process here of getting answers from the aliens. Other people were exposed to this at the time, thought it was crazy, So that's kind of the story about the alien computer. But once again, did they ever meet? In that interview with Jim McCampbell, he said Hynek did come to his home, and he didn't say anything about a computer, but that they went up on his roof and they saw UFOs. And so who knows?
Yeah, that's where a lot of these threads end up. I feel like, you get this story, J. Allen Hynek might have brought him a computer, and then it just dead ends here. And we don't have anybody who can confirm or deny it anymore. There's so many things like that.
And supposedly the NSA bought a townhouse across the street from him and were beaming him. So, perhaps somebody was feeding stuff into this computer. But this is like, you're going back to 1980.
Right.
It was pretty primitive, but who knows what technologies they were playing around with at Kirtland and Sandia Labs.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And there's the weird stories. He felt he was being beamed. He was having physical reaction on his body, little bumps and like spider bites, and the blue balls floating around that people'd see around his home.
Do you think there's any truth to those stories?
It's possibly, yeah. Once again, we're depending on the people who saw him. Bill Moore claimed he saw these little balls floating around, and so did Doty. It might have been some type of surveillance thingamajig or something. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all when you take this story just as a whole and you start to talk about the individual pieces, it gets so wild so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible, for sure.
Yeah.
Testing some type, he might have basically been a test subject for some of this stuff too, just to kind of blow his mind. If they had some type of whatever could create that effect of these little bubbles or blue bubbles or whatever you want to call them, just to see how he'd react to them.
And projected them into his house to see how far they could push this guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Bill Moore described it as he got up on it was like up in the corner of a room, so he got up and reached through it, and his hand just kind of passed through it.
So it would be a light, I guess. It's so hard without any photographic evidence or anything of all of this stuff.
Right.
Have you seen any of Bennewitz's photos that he took over Kirkland?
Yeah, they're available in Chris Lambright's book, X Descending. There are some of the photos. They look pretty interesting.
And does that also have the photos? Because they flew him over Dulce at one point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they showed him what might have been a crashed craft of some kind, but also might have been things that they set up for him to see.
Yeah, there's photos of those that Bennewitz took, but you can't really to see anything in those. You got to use your imagination. But he drew outlines over areas where he thought, and it appears there was some type of stealth aircraft, bomber that crashed there, that Bennewitz believed was an atomic-powered UFO of some sort. So I talked to Greg Valdez about this. So yeah, Bennewitz had photographed that. He was also a pilot. The Air Force took him out, according to the story, a few times to fly over the area where Doty claims they set up props to make him believe there was a alien underground base there. And this was all to divert his attention away from Kirtland. But Greg Valdez feels that at one point there was like a remote lab or something there that was connected to the cattle mutilations, and they were testing aircraft in that area, which might account for the crash. And so Bennewitz had identified this area and they put it on a map, but he didn't go out on the excursion. That was Gabe Valdez and Greg Valdez and a few other people, and they believe they found the area of the crash site, and they also found ventilation shafts they suspected was part of this underground or hidden lab there that was doing some type of testing. Also, one of the weird things, they take random photos at a certain shutter speed, and I think Bennewitz happened upon this, but Greg Valdez as well, that when they went out to the Archuleta Mountain, and they take random photos, and when they later developed them, these ships would show up in the photos.
Oh, wow.
Basically, secret aircraft they were testing during this period. They were using some type of stealth technology, but if you set the shutter speed, I forget what the shutter speed was, that they were able to take photos of these craft. And Greg Valdez told me they had a friend at Sandia Labs they took it into and magnified the image, and they were able to actually see an insignia, Air Force insignia on one of these craft. So there was a lot going on in the Dulce area.
Yeah, and Dulce itself, so we can sort of jump into the Dulce base story, because that's another wild, crazy piece of this mythology. And you spoke to Tal Levesque, who claims to be the originator of that story, correct?
One of the originators, for sure. He helped promote it as well. He was a key player. I mean, it was also John Lear was involved in this, as well as a lady named Cherry Hinkle. But Tal had a big hand in it. He had worked, or so he claimed, as a security guard for many years and had knowledge of these underground facilities. That was kind of his background. He had a long-standing interest prior to all this, dating back as a kid to the Shaver mysteries and inner earth portals and the creatures who lived there. So, and even in the early 80s, he and his wife put out a zine called The Hollow Earth Hassle, and came across an early issue where he was talking about alien underground bases in like 83 or so. So he was onto this pretty early on. And so the inspiration for the Dulce base story partially comes from Bennewitz. And according to Tal, he knew Bennewitz. He said as far as I know, he wasn't making this up, that he lived in Albuquerque around 79 or so, was interacting with Bennewitz during that period. Bennewitz, in his Project Beta report, or some of the letters he sent out, he was mentioning that there had been a incident at this underground base in Dulce where basically the members of the government military were chased out of there by the aliens. There had been some type of agreement, and anyway, that all blew up. And so the government military had to evacuate the base. And that's kind of the beginning of what became known as the Dulce War. What the Dulce papers, which, that was Bennewitz mentioned that in 81. The Dulce papers were released in like 89. And the story behind it was that a security worker there by the name of Thomas Castello and other security workers at Dulce Base became alarmed by the experiments the aliens, ETs, were doing on humans, grisly experiments, maybe these alien-human hybrids and crazy stories of reptilians needing to drink the precious bodily fluids of human children to survive, this wild stuff. So anyway, they became alarmed and they revolted, and there was this thing called the Dulce War where 66 humans were killed, and the only survivor was this Thomas Castello guy who escaped with photographs, video footage, secret documents, and also this flash gun that was a pretty powerful weapon that could dematerialize your enemies or whoever you wanted to dematerialize. But anyway, that was the Dulce paper story, and within it there's a bunch of these drawings of the different levels of Dulce base and the vats with the human alien hybrids, etc. And that was the basic story. Maybe 8-page document that was released in 89, and Tal seems to be the one who initially spread it. He put together 100 packets for different researchers, different folks, and sent these out. People who received these packets started writing about Dulce Base, kind of putting their own spin on it, doing their own research. And so over time you had different researchers who seemed to be confirming, what was in the Dulce papers. And so it kind of took on a life of of its own.
And that made me think back to your work with the Discordian antics and the Illuminati, because that was sort of what was going on there, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, and then maybe about how that parallels the Dulce papers?
Let's see where to start. Guess with Operation Mindfuck, it's called.
Okay.
Yeah, Kerry Thornley and Greg Hill in the late 50s, they started playing around with this idea of a spoof religion called Discordianism, based on the Greek goddess of chaos and discord, Eris. And it was just, for many years, just an in-joke between Greg Hill, Kerry Thornley, Bob Newport was another guy. And these were artists, writers. They were kind of anarchist types. Thornley eventually gets out of the Marines, reunites with Greg Hill in New Orleans, and they start kind of working on the Discordian Society again. Once again, it's kind of an in-joke, a concept for different writers and artists, humorists to play around with, and they meet other like-minded people who are interested in this spoof religion, one of whom was Robert Anton Wilson. Thornley becomes a target of Jim Garrison's investigation. Garrison believes, or he's led to believe, fed information that Thornley was some type of handler of Oswald, or maybe Thornley was a double pretending to be Oswald on some occasions, that he'd written the Idle Warriors, and later one of the first books after the assassination, about the Kennedy assassination, called Oswald. Garrison had the guys called the independent researchers that were feeding him information known later as the Daily Plaza Irregulars, and one of them, he believed that the Bavarian Illuminati was behind the assassination. The Bavarian Illuminati ran all the major networks, these type of things, and this was also the same guy who got a hold of the three tramp photos, which is another story entirely, but anyway, Thornley thought this was hilarious when he heard this, and so they came up with this plot to mess with Garrison and other investigators, and also the John Birch Society, whatever, sending out these spoof letters claiming that the Discordians were in a centuries-long battle with the Bavarian Illuminati, and that in other letters they were claiming to be the Illuminati, because Garrison had also came up with this theory that it was like these fringe religious groups that were behind the Kennedy assassination. They came across the Discordians, like what the hell is this bunch? So anyway, they're promoting with this Operation Mindfuck the resurgence of the Illuminati, and they all adopted Discordian or Illuminati names. So this stuff was getting seeded out, and at the same time, stuff at the Playboy Forum about all these different conspiracies. Now, all of this eventually resulted in the Illuminatus trilogy, the first book in the series dedicated to Greg Hill and Kerry Thornley of the Discordian Society. And throughout that, they had all these different material they'd send back to each other in the mail, and they're called groovy kits, where you'd send some clippings or a collage and throw a joint in there, and when you got it, you'd smoke a joint, and write your own little conspiracy theory or whatever, joke, humor, interesting things you'd found. All this material ended up in what's called the Principia Discordia, the kind of Bible of Discordian that Greg Hill put together, which nobody really knew about. I mean, a few hundred people by this time had gotten some of the early copies, but it was mentioned in the Illuminatus trilogy as well. So these mythologies of the Illuminati, obviously were a big part of that book, and it helped push these out into popular culture.
And I think what I see as a similarity is how you have these multiple authors who start to piggyback on each other. And that seems like that happens in the Dulce story too, where, you know, because if we're looking at the origin of that, I guess it was Myrna Hansen, actually, and then a thread that Tal Levasque picked up, and then these other authors start adding on to it and building it up bigger and bigger, right?
Yeah, and it's like with the Illuminati, I mean, everybody has some idea of what the Illuminati, or they've heard of it. Now, so there must be something to it, right? You know, and, well, yeah, there is in history, but
yeah, 200 years ago or something like that, right?
Yeah. But by continuing to, it's like anything that gets repeated over and over, you know, you look at like politics, our present situation, you can say some frickin' outlandish thing, but if you keep hammering it home, well, he said that, so there must be something. Maybe I'll do my own research.
And I see it in the way that they sort of, Doty would hand out a packet of UFO information, and some of it in there would be copied from the findings of Project Blue Book or something like that. And he would be incorporating these real stories into a whole bunch of other disinformation made up stuff as well. But that little kernel of truth made it real, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. It's how you get people to buy into conspiracy. If there's some kernel of truth you can point to, it's like, oh, okay. I was susceptible to that type of stuff back in the day.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we all are to a certain extent, because it ends up being this web, right? Where you can say, well, I know for a fact that this is real. I don't know if this other aspect of it is real, but how do I parse what I do and don't know? And I trust this person who told me. So, yeah.
So, yeah, there must be something to it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Which kind of leads me to this other question that I really wanted to ask you is why do you think, in the face of knowing that these things are ridiculous, you know, on its surface, the idea that Paul Bennewitz was getting reptilian images on his computer is crazy. But why do people take these leaks at face value when we should know that they're not?
Confirmation bias, you know, they want to believe. I don't know. I mean, it's a wonderful fantasy world, some of this stuff, especially when you feel like you're an insider. You're one of the few chosen to get this information. That's what it kind of seemed like before conspiracy theories went mainstream, you know. If you have a certain fondness or some emotional attachment to something, you know, then you look for things that help confirm it and kind of lose sight of, well, this sounds like so outrageous, but maybe it is real. I don't know. That's not much of an answer.
Well, but I think you're kind of onto something there in that confirmation bias, and also that feeling that you have something special and secret. And that seems to be something that Richard Doty and others played on for people like Bill Moore, Paul Bennewitz, to say you are onto something. You are very close to something very important. Yeah. It builds up their ego and their sense of self-worth, and then you can kind of weasel your way in there and convince them of other things that way, I think.
Even that with like some of the documents, you know, perhaps Bill Moore got it and said, well, part of this sounds right. This is bullshit. I know this is bullshit because of this. And his handlers could say, we were just testing you. You're correct.
Aren't you smart, right? Yeah.
Yes.
You saw this. Yeah.
With like QAnon, Pizzagate, all that stuff. Well, there seems to have been a kernel of truth there with the elite cabal of pedophiles, right?
Right. Yeah. The more we learn about it, the more we're like, oh, well, there was some truth to this, wasn't there?
Yeah. But there was a narrative overlaid over that. I'm weaving another conspiracy theory here, but I think that's a possibility.
Yeah, to distract away from what was actually going on at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know that we are going to know that for a while. Sort of like this, this all happened in the 80s to the early 90s.
Yeah.
And now it comes out, and now we can look back and say, oh, a lot of this was orchestrated. Well, yeah, that's that. So the film Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, I watched it. I thought it was amazing. Where can people check this out?
Probably the best way to get to it is through Substack. We started, myself and Chris Graybill, who's the director and producer of the film. Substack is called Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks. And we've also started a podcast here recently as well, which you can find there at the Substack.
Great. And in terms of you and your work, is there a place people should go to check out your work?
Well, there's adamgorightly.com, and that'd probably be the best way. I have a couple of blogs, Untamed Dimensions, it's called, another one called Chasing UFOs, which I really haven't done much on recently, except, put up a few YouTubes now and then.
All right, well, definitely go check that out and take a look at the doc. It goes really deep into a lot of these things, and I think it is a very valuable resource to understand the history of UFOs and what is going on in today's society with a lot of this disinformation and how we got there. All right. Well, thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate you coming on, being our first interview here.
Thank you, sir.
You've been listening to my interview with Adam Gorightly, author of the book and documentary Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks. If you want to know more about the film or watch it yourself, check out the link in the show notes. For any fans of history, conspiracy, and UFO lore, I can't recommend it highly enough. And if you want to check out more Fortean history, head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com, where you can find links to our podcast, socials, merch store, and all that good stuff. We'll have some more interviews coming in the future, so stick around for that. But until then, it's a weird world, so be safe out there. Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the Fortean History podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways you can show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on socials @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.